In July of 1988, a scoutmaster led 7 kids into the national forest and never came back. Their tents were zipped, backpacks untouched, one fire still smoldering under a pot of half-boiled rice. 34 years later, a storm unearthed his journal inside a hollow stone, bone dry, pages intact. The final entry reads, "Something walks beside us at night. I told them not to follow. I heard them follow anyway." Beneath that, smeared in red, it brings them back, not the way they were. Read the warnings out loud, and you'll start hearing footsteps to always one behind. The flashlight hadn't been in her bag. Clara stood just outside the tree line, hands trembling beneath her sleeves, staring at the circle of canvas tents. The dusk had fallen too quickly, spilling in like ink over the forest, bleeding into her skin. The others had gone ahead, 6 of them, laughter thinned by distance, vanishing behind the stones before she could call out. And then the hush returned. Like the woods exhaled once they were gone, she lowered her gaze. The map she'd brought, photocopied from the state archive and folded along old creases, ended 2 inches before the clearing. Past the broken fence, no trails were marked. The ranger who handed it to her had shrugged. "That part got revised in '89, he said. "Budget cuts. Or a fire, I forget. But there were no scorch marks. No charcoal on the trees. Just moss and dirt and stone." The flashlight clunked against her boot. She didn't remember packing. It was small, silver, army issue, cold, and when she knelt to pick it up, her fingers paused above it. Someone had written something into the handle. Letters carved by something dull and slow. "Don't follow." She stood up fast, pulse in her neck, and looked back toward the trail. No one. Not even footprints. Only the trees, tall and unaware. Pressing in with the gravity of decades, she flicked the light on. It stuttered, then held. The beam fell across the tents. The fabric sagged in on itself, like breath had escaped. No wind moved. Each tent was zipped perfectly. Some still had tags hanging from the doors. Unit B, July, '88. The names were handwritten. Fading, scratched in marker that hadn't bled with age. She read them aloud under her breath. She knew those names, but not all 7 were listed. One was missing. She circled, carefully, through the dirt and pine needles. A burnt photo stuck up from a half-buried tin, one corner, scorched black, the rest curling at the edges. It was of the group, facing the camera, wearing the same shirts she'd seen in the archive. But the boy on the end, the one pointing toward the tree line, he had no shadow. Her breath caught. She turned the photo, then again, but it wasn't damage, no tear, no smudge. The grass beneath the others made sense. Only his feet stood wrong. Hovering, his fingers extended, frozen in midair. She folded the photo into her coat pocket, as if hiding it might keep it from being true. A tree creaked nearby. Not from wind, there was none, but like old wood twisting in its sleep. She stepped into the nearest tent. Inside, 4 neatly arranged sleeping bags, unzipped but unused. 1 pair of shoes, children's, blue, laces double-knotted, sat aligned at the entrance. A folded hymn page rested on top of them. No book. Just 1 torn leaf, damp at the corners. She didn't read it. She didn't need to. She felt it. Like breath behind her. Like the page still remembered being sung. She turned to leave and caught her own reflection in the tent's small side mirror. It didn't match the air. Behind her, the flap was closed, but the mirror reflected it open. Wide. No one stood there, still. Her breath fog. She fled the tent. Back in the clearing, she paused, gasping softly, 1 hand against the trunk of a tree. The stone circle was barely visible in the last of the twilight, wide, uneven, natural, but wrong. As if the forest had avoided it, she raised the flashlight again. A glint flashed to the side. A drawer. In a tree, built into the base of the trunk. half swallowed by time and bark. A wooden drawer jutted just enough to see the handle. She knelt. The grain was smooth, dark, unweathered. She pulled Dot inside. A ledger. Faded red leather. The pages stuck with humidity, mold crawling up one corner. She peeled it open, coughing softly as the spores lifted. Names. Dozens. First names only. But some had dates. Some had none. She found one circled. Clara, 8, her own name, her own age. Not now then, she hadn't been there in 88. She wasn't. In any of the records. Her mother said she'd never been to camp. There were no photos, no badges, no signed permission slips. But the ledger said otherwise. She let it fall back into the drawer. Shoved it closed. The night pressed down harder. Now she checked the tents again. One more time. Carefully, she counted. 1, 2. 6, 6, not 7. She stood still, head tilted. Mouth open slightly, like a question about to form. Behind her, a twig snapped. She turned. Nothing, only the forest. But she knew now what the 7th tent had been. It was the space that wasn't there. The gap that didn't show up. The map didn't end, the memory did. She remembered a boy's hand grabbing hers. She remembered running. She remembered being told she'd made it up. She remembered silence, years of it. Echoing behind doors that never quite closed. In her pocket, the photo warmed. She pulled it out. Looked again. The boy was still pointing, but now, in the far background barely visible, through the blur was a shape. Long, pale, and the same height as the missing camp guide. She closed her eyes. From behind one of the tents, a dim light flickered. She turned, slowly. The flashlight, hers, or someone else's, had fallen to the ground, upright, and it was glowing now with a single steady beam. Fixed on the woods, fixed on the path past the stones. Then one sharp flash, then silence. The tents had not been opened, not unzipped, not slashed, not tugged or peeled. They simply sat still, rounded, waiting like lungs holding breath. Clara stepped between them with care, as if any false movement might crack the moment open. It was too silent for birds. Even the insects had left. She crouched beside the first tent. Canvas frayed slightly at the seams. The label, barely legible, read Unit C, July 1988. Her hand hovered before the zipper, not touching, just feeling. For heat, she could smell something faint, burned rice maybe, or ash and metal. The scent of something recently lost. The flap creaked as she opened it. Inside, 4 sleeping bags, neatly arranged. No wrinkles, no signs of struggle. Just an open field of synthetic cloth and forgotten dreams. A pair of socks lay folded by one pillow, stained with mud but dry. No blood, no drag marks, no broken straps. Her eyes caught on something near the back corner, a single child's shoe, white canvas, untied, as if someone had just stepped out of it. She touched it and flinched. It was still warm. She staggered back into the light, breathing uneven. Nothing screamed. She moved to the campfire. Stones stacked in ritualized purpose. Ash pooled at the center, not cold, but not rising either. In the middle, a blackened pot stood, long-handled and still upright. She didn't need to lift the lid, she already knew what sat inside. Rice, congealed. The edges crisped, center soupy. It looked halfway cooked, as if the fire had died seconds after the last stir. 2 mugs sat beside it, one turned upright, one on its side, tipped toward the forest. She stood frozen for minutes before noticing it. A metal spoon, standing straight in the ground beside the fire. Not laid, not dropped, pierced, vertical, as if planted. She tried to speak and couldn't. Around her, the tents loomed gently, no signs of panic, no torn straps. Just the implication of pause. She found the ledger in a small wooden bin beside the mess tent. Mold brushed the edges, a fine green whispering over the cover. She opened it. The paper resisted, but gave. Names, dates, inventory. The writing shifted midway through. Clean ink turned jagged. Some entries had been crossed out with faint pencil. She traced them, half hoping hers wouldn't be there. It wasn't, but someone had written it in the margin anyway. Clara L., potential observer. Log July 14th, 88. She blinked. That wasn't possible. She had never been here. Her mother had said. So, there were no photos of her in the uniform, no merit badges in the closet, no stories, no bruises. Just a half memory of Lakewater, and stars she couldn't name. She flipped the page. Attached to it with yellowed tape was a torn corner of something else. A hymn, maybe. Faded musical notes. Handwriting on the back. Only sing it if you're alone. She dropped the ledger. When she stood again, the world felt dimmer. The mess tent flapped once. She hadn't noticed it unzipped. She stepped inside. Metal trays were stacked. Spoons aligned perfectly. Someone had left half a tray untouched cornbread. Softened, molding at the edge. A cup of milk still stood. She touched it. Warm dot on the far wall. A bulletin board still clung to 5 names typed and printed. Edges curled. But there was a 6th pinhole. No paper. Just a missing square of memory. She turned. The back flap of the tent had a mirror. Part of the emergency shaving kit. Too small to see her full reflection. But she stepped closer, breath fogging the edge. Then stopped. In the mirror, the tents outside weren't still. One shifted, just enough. Just once. She stepped out fast. Everything looked the same again. Calm. Still zipped. Still unbothered. Except. One of the tents was open, now. Barely. A crack in the canvas. Just wide enough for breath to escape. She didn't approach. Not right away. She turned in a circle instead, searching for reason. The trees didn't offer any. Their bark wore no carvings. No initials. But at the base of one thin, dying, brittle she saw something she hadn't noticed before. A crack. Hairline. Moving slowly downward like a vein in dry bone, and below it. A drawer. She knelt. Wood. Pale. Too new to be here this long. It slid out silently. Inside. A single Polaroid. She pulled it out. 8 figures stood near the fire pit. Faces unclear. Clothing familiar. She could almost recognize the shapes. Way they held themselves. But the timestamp in the corner made her throat close. The 12th of July, 1988. 10:24 p.m. The photo had not yet been taken. Not when the guide had radioed in the next morning. Not when the patrol arrived and found no one. Not when Clara was 8 years old and asleep in a bed she never remembered. The center figure pointed toward the tents. 7 scouts. 1 adult, but there was an 8th figure. In the background. By the trees. Blurry, tall, almost featureless, and glowing. She clutched the photo against her chest. Pulse sharp behind her ribs. Behind her. Something crunched in the dirt. She turned. Nothing. But the steam from the rice pot still drifted, faint and high, trailing like smoke. No footprints. Just warmth. Just absence. Just the implication of something that had been here and might still be. Her hands shook. She took the Polaroid and stuffed it into her coat pocket, closed the drawer. Backed away. She heard something. A voice not spoken, but remembered. Threaded through her childhood in dreams and forgotten car rides. A whisper. Only sing it if you're alone. A branch cracked. Distant. Measured. She did not sing. She stepped back into the clearing. The tents, unzipped now, each one flapped. Faintly in rhythm, like lungs. A static click echoed from the hill. Then silence. She turned toward the ranger station. Walked faster than she wanted. She didn't look back. She didn't see the 8th tent. Or the figure holding the spoon. Or the ledger flipping itself. Open to the last entry. Thermal scan from 88 shows 8 heat signatures, but only 7 scouts. It had rained the night before. Not enough to flood, but enough to wash the paths clean, enough to make everything feel like it had just been laid down again, wet and waiting. Clara stepped from the paved edge of the institution's rear walkway onto the forgotten trail where the leaves stuck to her boots like memory. The air here held no signal. Her phone had died before she even reached the trees, though she hadn't remembered using it. She wasn't supposed to be here. But someone had marked the envelope for her eyes only in black wax pencil, and tucked inside had been a Xerox of a photo blurry, burnt at one edge. A boy crouching near a stone marker, his shirt muddy. Behind him, a tilt of fence, and what looked like hymn lyrics scrawled across the back wall in charcoal. 4 lines. Torn at the 5th, when I am gone, you'll hear me still wear shoes. Are left beneath the hill. The 5th line had been burned out. The boy's face had no year. Now, Clara followed where the leaves sank. Water pulled at the ankles of her jeans. The trail veered in places that didn't match the map she had scanned from the archives. She carried it in her coat, but she no longer checked it. The trail had its own logic. Her boots slid near the slope, a thicket brushing back her sleeve, and there, beside a fallen stone marked with carved initials and 3 dots beneath, sat something small, swollen, and half buried in mud. It was a shoe. Children's. Canvas turned a pale green with age. The laces curled like they'd been tied under water. She hesitated, not because it frightened her, but because it looked placed and inside folded like a secret, kept too long a photo. Its colors intact, no water damage. No aging on the gloss. Sane boy, but this time, he was older. Barely. His face carried a year the institution said never happened. He stood beside a mirror propped in the forest clearing. Trees behind him held summer's breath. But the mirror inside it showed a room, linoleum floor, metal chair, an overhead light that flickered, and pinned to the wall, a missing poster. His face, grainy. Same shirt. Clara touched the photo with gloved fingers, turned it over. No writing. Just a fingerprint in ash. A dry crack echoed from deeper in the trees. She froze, listened. No birdsong. Just a distant, staggered thudding. Not footsteps. But repeats. Echoes of something dropping. She pocketed the photo. Marked the stone's location on her silent phone with a gesture that meant nothing to satellites. And she followed the sound, deeper now into the part of the woods that didn't map. The leaves here were wrong. They covered no trees above them. She noticed it only when the shapes didn't match broad oak leaves where there were only ever pines. One leaf, when turned over, was printed on the underside. Words in faded red ink, property of Division B. Do not file digitally, she dropped. It stepped back. Her foot struck something solid, a grate, rusted, hidden, beneath twigs. It wasn't large, just enough to suggest a crawl space, but it bore a welded seal and a small square panel beside it. The panel had been cracked, like someone had tried to rip it off without tools. Through the grate, something hissed. Not steam, not wind. It sounded like a tape winding, slowly, as if playing backwards. Clara dropped to her knees, listened. A voice played. Not his, but it said his name, not like calling. Like reading. She rose. She should have left. She told herself this. Instead, she circled the grate. Found a torn hymn book buried beneath the sodden earth a few feet away. It was missing pages, but one fragment remained stuck to the back cover. A verse written in a child's hand. Don't sleep in glass rooms. Don't look when they write your name twice. There were fingerprints along the edge, scratched into the inside flap. Room B7 doesn't close. Don't let them say it does. Clara turned back toward the path. But there was no longer a path. Just a slope of leaves that looked like breath had passed through them. And there a drawer, standing alone, not attached to anything. A single desk. Drawer, its paint peeled, its base still bearing the impression of 4 removed legs. It was open. Inside, A mirror. She saw herself. But the reflection wore last week's clothes, and the date in the corner printed as if by a CCTV overlay read. Sept 14, 1987. She stepped back. The mirror didn't. It kept her reflection forward, watching her. Then the breath thawed across the surface. A small handprint appeared, slowly, then another. Too high for a child to reach from inside the drawer. She closed it. It stayed shut. The hiss began again, from the grate. Only this time, it was layered with something else. A whimper, words in a loop. He said I could come home. He said I could come home. She pressed her hand to her chest. It wasn't just sound. It was memory. She had heard that voice before. Not in the forest, in the therapy room. From a boy they'd said was recovered, who never drew anything but eyes, over and over, never his own. She ran then, not away. Toward where the institution should have begun, the back lot. The equipment. Shed. Anything that proved now was real. She found a wall, just a wall. Concrete, tall, no seams. Except one. A hairline crack, twitching like breath. She touched it. It moved, and something clicked inside her mind, not like memory, but like release. Because she remembered this. Not the wall. Not the grate. The voice. She had spoken to the boy in the photo, not long ago, in a session. A file she couldn't find again. He'd asked, "Do you remember the shoes?" She hadn't, but she had said yes, because they told her to. She staggered, backward. The crack in the wall grew longer. The leaves behind her began to stir, though there was no wind. A rhythm in them. Like something walking beneath. She turned, and there he stood. The boy, or his shape, holding nothing. Wearing nothing unusual, except his eyes reflected light. From no source. He didn't move. But his voice reached her. Not from his mouth. From under the leaves. It wasn't me in the mirror. The ground beneath her shifted, not down. Not up. Away. A drawer groaned open. Somewhere behind the trees. The tape hissed louder, and the photo in her pocket grew hot. She pulled it out. The boy was gone. In his place, the mirror. Inside it now her. Not. Reflected. Posed. Behind her, in the mirror scene. A door with no handle. Redacted papers pinned to the wall behind her head. A hymn scrawled across. Her back in ink. She dropped the photo, stepped on it, felt the plastic bend, but it did not break. And then came the whisper. Not his, not hers, but the one from the walls. The echo that filled the room when a therapist leaves and forgets to turn off the intercom. You told him to draw it. So he did. She staggered backward. The trees did not move, but the light between them rearranged. Shapes of desks, cabinets, a nameplate with no name. She fell, knocked down, but out. And the last thing she saw was the child's shoe, still dry, still full of ash. And the poster taped to the inside of her own reflections. Room, missing. Clara Ellen Thatcher, last seen. Room B7, SEPT 14, 1987. It had her photo. Same clothes as today. Therapist log, appended to archive. He keeps drawing his own missing poster. But the child we recovered was never listed as missing. She was. It wasn't the journal that disturbed Meredith. It was the pressure on her fingers when she opened it, like she was interrupting something mid-sentence. She hadn't meant to find it. It had been wedged behind a filing cabinet in the north annex, one of the old therapy rooms, sealed since the 1978 water damage. The walls had peeled in long curling ribbons, exposing layered paints that made it look like the institution had tried to forget its own skin. When she pried the cabinet forward, the journal fell with a sound that did not echo, just landed. Its cover was soft, wrong soft, like paper boiled too long. The name scrawled across the front was Daniel. But Meredith didn't owe a Daniel. Not here, not then. She should have left it. But memory is its own narcotic, and the more she read, the less the hallway outside existed. At first, It read like a boy's entries, dates, tally marks, drawings of birds with missing heads. Then came the shift. Not in ink color or pen pressure, but in voice. Page 17 was blank. It bled when she touched a dot by page 18. The handwriting leaned left, as if fleeing the page's edge. The tone changed more direct, like it was addressing something, not her. Not any reader. The walls open if you hum the right hymn. Meredith paused. On the floor near her, a burnt photo stuck out from under the radiator. She hadn't seen it when she entered. Carefully, she picked it up. The faces were mostly gone, melted into streaks, but she could make out two children, one holding a hymnal, the other with a mirror instead of a face. The date at the bottom was 1979, 2 years after the fire it supposedly died in. That's when the humming started. Low, not from a throat but from the room itself. Like old pipes remembering Dot, she turned back to the journal. He wore my shoes. That's how he got out, but the left one still has my blood. On instinct, she looked down. Her own shoes were muddy from the grounds, but beneath the cot across the room, something small and dusty caught her eye. A child's shoe. Brown leather, the sort issued here decades ago. She reached for it. The laces stuck to her skin. When she pulled it out, something clinked inside. A button, a tooth. She placed it back. The journal was still warm when she opened it again. Warmer. The pages after 22 didn't have lines. They were drawn by hand shaking. One showed the layout of the old dormitories, but wrong. The staircase led down into something labeled reflection room. She'd never heard of it. She'd cleaned every wing of this place. There was no reflection room, except the map. Ended at the stones, the field behind the garden, fenced off in rusted wire and overgrown with gilt. Stones arranged in a circle too precise to be casual. Meredith had always assumed it was a failed landscaping project. The journal disagreed. He kept us quiet. Not with fear, with memory. He said if we remembered too loud, the year would hear us wrong. She ran her fingers along the page. The ink smudged, not into blur but into motion. Letters curling like hair down the drain. Words resisting being. Read. From the hallway. A door creaked slow, and not alone. Meredith froze. Her breath caught in her throat, but fogged the window in front of her. A breath, but hers had stopped. She turned slowly. No one. The drawer behind her rattled. She hadn't opened it. It hadn't even existed before. Inside, only a torn page. A hymn. Handwritten. The last line read, "And when I am gone, remember not my name, but the echo in the hall." She folded it without meaning to, fingers moving like they knew. And then she saw the mirror. It had not been there when she entered. Leaning against the wall, its surface was dark, mottled, but reflected. Snow. It was August. Worse, in its frame, she saw the hallway before the renovations. No linoleum, no safety rails. Just peeling green paint and the door with the red palm print. The red palm print hadn't been visible since 1983, since Daniel vanished. She backed away. She whispered, "This wasn't his journal, was it?" The room hurt her. The journal fell open. New ink, wet, on page 27. No, it was yours. The handwriting was hers. Exactly. Except she'd never written that. Except she remembered that phrase. Her mother used it when the reports didn't match. When Meredith woke up with marks the staff said weren't there. She slammed the journal shut. It pulsed. Her watch ticked twice, then stopped. The handprint was now on the inside of the window, not red. Black, like ash. She ran. Down the old hallway, past the therapy room, but the turn to the main wing was gone. There was only one door. It hadn't been there before. It was slightly open. Light through a cracked line. Flickering, but not electric. She pushed it. The room beyond was stone, dirt, cold. The stones from the garden, but inside. And in the center, a name carved in the floor, Daniel LM, but the last name was scratched out. Underneath, someone had written, "I remember for him, because he isn't allowed." The journal was in her hand again. She hadn't picked it up. It opened. The ink moved, not in flow but in choice. New line formed. "Say it out loud." "I'll show you where you were." Her lips parted. She read the entry. As she spoke, the ink trembled, rose, and slithered across the page like blood pulled by magnet. Symbols reshaped. Maps formed. The basement she didn't know she'd been in emerged in ink, the tiles with numbers. The soundproofed door. The man with no reflection. The page bled. The breath behind her returned. She turned. No one, but the handprint was on her shoulder. When she looked down, her other hand held a photo. Not burnt. It showed her, but her reflection was a year ahead. Dressed in mourning. In the mirror behind her. Daniel. Smiling. The journal pulsed once more. The final page read, "The ink moves when read aloud." And behind her, a voice began reading it back. He hadn't meant to open the box. It slid from beneath the plywood cot with a soft hiss, as though pulled by gravity or memory, not by his hand. Dust moved like sleep between the beams. The cabin's floor bent in the middle, swollen with decades of silence. When Jeremy knelt, his knees found the place where someone else had knelt too, over and over. The wood bowed in a shape too human. The box was sealed with a strip of discolored packing tape. Red marker on the top. Cabin 7. Jeremy's group. Bled through in the shape of a date, 1987. His name wasn't on it, but it opened for him anyway. Inside, a stack of charcoal sketches tied with string, torn hymn fragments. 2 left shoes, both children's sizes, and a drawing one that didn't match the others. Graphite on aging camp worksheet paper. The usual sun, the usual trees. 8 tents crudely drawn but accounted for. Labeled, dated. But below them, a 9th, no name, no label. No zipper, just a yawning black shape where the entrance would be too dark to be shadow, too deep to be ink. Jeremy stared at it longer than he meant to. His eyes didn't adjust. The pencil pressure had cracked the page at its center, as though the artist had driven the point through on purpose. The shape pulsed. It pulled. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. The worksheet was dated August 17, 1994, but the box was sealed and cataloged in June of '87, and even then, the cabin had already been closed for restructuring. A post-it on the underside of the lid read, "Do not open. Reassigned to basement." In a different hand, "Already moved to storage room B4. This is not ours." Jeremy remembered that handwriting. The sharp slope of the capital R. It was Ms. Fletcher's. She'd drowned in '89, her body never found. He reached for the sketch again. The paper had grown warm. There were no windows in the cabin. The only light came from a sliver through the crooked doorframe, a line of brightness that stopped at the 9th tent, as if repelled. Jeremy's breath caught. The air held something. Too still, too held together. He turned the sketch over. A name in the bottom corner, Benji. A last name had been erased, not crossed out. Not smudged, but scraped from the paper so violently the fibers were stripped. A pressure memory. A child's fury. Or grief. Jeremy's hand trembled. The name Benji meant nothing until it did. The scout with the eye patch. The one who always drew instead of talking. The one whose file had been misfiled permanently. He saw it again. Benji's head bent low. Crayons clutched too tightly, even when the other kids were splashing at the lake. Jeremy had been 17, a counselor in training. He was told not to ask, not about the patch, not about the scar on Benji's arm, and definitely not about the unlisted tent the boy always insisted he'd slept in. Only one I fit in. Benji had whispered once, when Jeremy brought him cocoa during a storm. The others breathe when I sleep, that one just watches. Jeremy hadn't known what to say then. He didn't now. A breath fogged the mirror to his left, but Jeremy was alone. The mirror wasn't in the cabin earlier, he'd been sure. It stood, now in the corner, leaning against the wall like it had always belonged. Dust didn't touch it. And something about the frame was wrong. Too clean. Too recent. Too much like the camp infirmary's hall mirror, the one removed after the fire. Jeremy stepped toward it. 1 half step. 2. His own face returned to him, late and slightly off, like an old tape delayed by damage. He squinted at the reflection. Behind him wasn't the cabin, it was the campfire pit. It was night, and in the grainy reflection, the tents were visible. 8 of them. 1 missing. 1 missing. 1. But the 9th was not gone, it simply wasn't there yet. His chest tightened. His lungs knew something before his mind allowed it. He stepped back. The mirror stayed showing what it wanted to. The drawer to the left of the cot. Opened. There was no drawer there, and yet the sound was clean, direct, wooden. Like a finger tapping on a coffin lid from the inside. Jeremy turned. It wasn't a drawer. It was the floorboard. A crack had formed where none had been before. Long, jagged, and wrong. It moved. Jeremy dropped to his knees. Beneath the board. Another stack of paper. Damp, curled, warped, but legible. More sketches. All signed Benji. All dated 1994.1, showed a counselor's face, hollowed. No eyes. A name badge read Jeremy. The tent behind the figure was unzipped, spilling not shadow, but hands. Small ones. Too many. The next sketch. The camp's old chapel, cross broken. Hymn pages scattered like moth wings. One corner had been torn and taped back with a child's handwriting. He said the choir didn't stop even after we left. Jeremy's mouth went dry. His left hand was shaking. He remembered that hymn. He remembered stopping it. He remembered locking the chapel after a night of whispers and laughter that didn't echo. But they'd said it was wind. Just wind. He pressed the paper to his chest. It burned somehow. The heat of recognition. A child's shoe was tucked beneath the stack. Just one. Left-footed. Jeremy turned it over. His own name had been etched faintly inside the sole. He hadn't owned shoes like this. Not that size. Not that year. A whisper returned. From nowhere. From the cabin. From before. He drew what wasn't there. Until it was. The mirror cracked out hairline. A single elegant fracture blooming across its surface like lightning frozen mid-thought. The reflection warped. Jeremy saw his face again. But younger. Bruised. A counselor badge too big on his chest. Standing. Beside a tent that wasn't on any map. Smiling. He didn't remember smiling. Not that day. The glass fogged again. This time, a second breath. Smaller. Higher. Not his. He backed up. His foot struck something soft. Crayons. Dozens. Warped. Melted. Melded into a clump shaped like a face. It wasn't crude. It was disturbingly detailed. Open mouth. Etched eyes. The teeth were too sharp and too many. The wax still warm. Decades. Later, Benji had drawn things into existence, and someone had buried them. Jeremy looked back toward the box. The 9th tent sketch was gone. In its place, a burnt photo. Camp group shot. 8 kids. 1 counselor. But there was a faint outline where a 9th child should have been. The corner burned away showed part of a date. August 1st? 1987, but in the ash along the edge, a name had been scratched. Benji was never enrolled. Jeremy stared. The crayon face began to melt again. Its mouth moved. And in that voice then, high but deliberate, came the final whisper. You zipped the tent, but I was still in it. It was labeled in pencil, faint and wavering, like it had been written with a trembling hand. No case, no date. Just a strip of masking tape on the reel. Don't listen past minute 4. Jamie sat hunched over the playback console in the archive. Booth. Headphones loose on one side. The room had no light except the soft real glow and the blue standby light of the digitizer. The audio lab had been shut since the fire in '94, or at least that was what the report said. But Jamie had found the key in a hymnal, tucked between Psalm 33 and a torn-out index card that read, "He still walks." The walls breathed in that room, slow and inward, like lungs beneath wood. The kind of silence that remembered sound. She started the tape. Soft crackling. Dead air. A thump, distant, like a microphone dropped in the grass. Then children. Running. One says, "Wait for me." Another sings something too slurred to catch. Jamie didn't blink. She knew the patterns by now. She'd been cataloging the old camp tapes for 6 months. This one was different. No file, no log entry, no matching timestamp. A ghost archive. At 2:13, a voice called out across the audio, female, strained. "That's not the way. That's not where we buried them." She rewound it. Listened again. Same voice, same directionless fear. She froze. That was her mother's voice. But the tape was dated. God, it wasn't dated, but it sounded early '80s. And Jamie had been born in '91. Her mother had never worked at the camp. She hated the woods. That's what she always said. "That's not where we buried them." Jamie stared at the waveform on the screen. Something moved just beneath the noise floor. A structure in the static. A rhythm too intentional. She played on. At 3:12, there was a hymn played off key. Organ notes, no lyrics. Faint coughing underneath. Then a scrape like wood across tile, then breathing. 2 sets, one adult, one shallow, quick, childlike, Jamie's. Fingers trembled. She pressed pause. She shouldn't have, because at that exact moment, something in the booth behind her let out a faint crack. She turned. There was nothing, only the soundproof wall, the one with the fire-scorched paneling and the burned-in outline of a filing cabinet. Long since removed. She resumed. At 3:57, a whisper. "She still walks near the tree line." Jamie inhaled. And at 4:01, the tape went silent. Not quiet. Silent. No hiss, no floor noise. Just a void, until a surge of static flared. But it wasn't random. On the digitizer screen, the audio wave formed a shape, a spiral, with 3 dots. Looping back, she'd seen it once. Behind the chapel, etched into the prayer stone, blackened by fire. She thought it was just ash stain. Now she knew. It was a warning, or a seal. Jamie ejected the tape. She didn't catalog it. She wrapped it in. Same hymnal where she'd found the key and placed it in her backpack, beside her phone and the small burnt photo she'd never shown anyone. A girl standing in front of the chapel, barefoot, hand raised as if waving, but no handprint visible on the glass door behind her. That photo had no date. She'd found it stuck between 2 ledger pages that didn't match. One listed 7 campers arriving on July 3rd, the other only 5 leaving on July 17. No mention of a fire. No record of rain that week. Jamie stood. She left the archive room without shutting down the console. As she passed the basement stairwell, she paused. The mirror was still there. Hung above the fire extinguisher box that had never been filled. It reflected a hallway, lit by yellow fluorescence, but it was wrong. The time on the hallway clock said 2:11 a.m. Jamie's phone read 11:46 p.m. In the mirror, a girl passed behind her, wearing a camp uniform from the old era, brown sash, wool skirt, single barrette. Jamie turned. The hall was empty. She looked back at the mirror. No one, just her. And the door behind her, still closed. But now in the reflection, that door had a drawer, just below the knob. One she hadn't noticed. One that didn't exist. She blinked. The drawer opened. Not in real space, just in the mirror. Inside was a child's shoe. Half melted. Canvas. Navy blue with a plastic tag that read, Unit C Day 6. Jamie backed away. She ran. Finally, her boots slamming the cold stone floor, the spiral still flashing in her mind like a reel caught in loop. Outside, the woods were still, moonless. The old chapel loomed in silhouette. She shouldn't have gone there, but her legs moved on memory. That was the trick of it. These places didn't forget. They just waited. At the back of the chapel, the stones were cold, weather-worn. She knelt there, still visible. The spiral, 3 dots, but now scratched. Above it, a name. Jamie. Her own name. Not carved, scratched like fingernail gouge. As if written. From the inside of the stone, she turned. Nothing. But the breath behind. Her fogged on the chapel window. And hers hadn't. She stepped back. She reached for her phone. Snapped a photo of the stone. But the screen showed something else. A face in the window. A girl. Same as the photo. Same hand raised. Now. A handprint appeared behind her on the glass, faint, then vivid. She looked up. Nothing there. But the breath. Stayed. 2 rhythms. Like on the tape. She ran. She didn't stop until the car. She locked the doors. Sat in silence. Gripping the wheel, eyes unfocused, from the passenger seat. Her bag RUSTL, ED. The hymnal had fallen open. The tape lay exposed. Next to it, the burnt photo. And now, in the photo, her own face stared back, where the girl had been, her eyes wide. Her mouth open in a whisper she hadn't made. She looked at the spiral on the tape. In her reflection on the window. The spiral was drawn on her neck. Not real. Not inked, just there, like a memory or a scar. The recorder in her hand buzzed. She hadn't pressed record. She hadn't touched it, but it played. Don't listen past minute 4. Then, she still walks near the tree line. Then silence. Then breath. 2. Rhythms. Then her own voice. That's not where we buried them. They told Josie not to return. Not in those words. Just a call that the old cabins were being torn down, and if you had anything left behind, it's likely ash by now. She hadn't replied. She hadn't said a word since she found the red pencil. It was in her father's box. Old camp forms. Clippings, 1 Polaroid curled from heat. No name on the envelope, no return address. Just a note that read, medical logs, incomplete, try basement. She came on a Tuesday, gray and dry. The grounds were empty, gravel clinking beneath her boots like bones cracking in a forgotten wrist. The welcome sign still hung, crooked and heavy. The paint blistered off the R in returning campers. Just returning now. She didn't remember the nurse's name. No one did. But Josie remembered the red sweater, the plastic buttons shaped like daisies, and how the woman would hum something, not quite a lullaby, not quite right, when cleaning a wound. Josie had fallen once hard, split the skin across her cheek. The scar still whispered beneath her eye, faint as a hairline crack, but when she'd asked her mother last week, the reply had chilled her. There was no nurse that summer, Josie. You went to the A. Josie had never been to the E. She stepped into the infirmary. The walls had collapsed inward, swallowed by mildew and time. The cot where she once bled had a tree growing through it now. She stepped over a decayed drawer whose handle had fallen off, then stopped. The drawer was locked, but there was no keyhole. It shouldn't exist. She touched the side and felt breath. Her own? She checked the mirror on the far wall, silver, cracked and fogged in one corner. She leaned in. The crack trembled. Behind her on the wall, she saw it, a handprint. Small, greasy, still, fresh. She turned. Nothing. But then the hymn. Quiet, like paper being torn. Under a door. It came from beneath. The basement had no listing on any map. No counselor recalled it. But Josie remembered once waking from anesthesia and hearing wheels on stone. Someone wheeling something large down steps. The nurse had said, "Sleep. That's not for you." But Josie remembered the sound. She found the steps behind a rusted cabinet. They weren't stairs, not really, just planks nailed down in an angle that defied weight. Still, she went. The wood bent, exhaled, warned. The light was wrong down there, not dim wrong. Like memory filmed. Through gauze. The air smelled like wet metal and pencils worn too low on the far wall. Medical charts, 7, each with red pencil signatures. Same name, same loop on the capital E. No credentials listed, just cleared for re-entry. Symptoms. Consistent with adjustment disorder. Memory correction initiated. Every child's name was underlined. She knew one Bethany Marsh, drowned in 1998, or disappeared. The news changed its story twice. On the back of Bethany's chart, someone had stapled a burnt photo. It showed a group of children by the lake holding hands. Behind them, the nurse, her red sweater too vivid. She wasn't looking at the camera. Her face was turned, but there was a second face. Inside the shadow of her hair. Josie dropped the clipboard. Footsteps, not echoing, muffling, like someone walking on something soft. Flesh. She turned. The hymn played again, but louder now. Like it was in her jaw. At the far end of the hall, a child's shoe sat neatly on a ledge. Pink. Velcro straps melted inward. It pulsed. She didn't remember that shoe, but it remembered her. The wall beside it cracked. A hairline like her scar, slowly splitting down, and a drawer slid open. Inside, a mirror, but not hers. It showed the nurse's station, perfectly intact. Flowers on the desk, blood on the sink. Josie leaned closer. The date on the wall calendar, August 1996. It was 1999, the summer she attended. Nurse appeared. Looked directly at Josie. Smiled. Behind her, children stood still. Not restrained, just paused. Their faces blurred. Not by motion, by removal. She touched the mirror. It didn't reflect her. It reflected that room, endlessly. As if time had collapsed in on itself and only the nurse remained. Like a splinter that refused to come out, something touched her shoulder. She turned, half waiting to find no one. But there was a figure. Not flesh, not shadow. Just surgical white, soaked at the hem. No face, just a plastic daisy button, pinched between two fingers. Does it still hurt? The thing asked. Josie couldn't speak. Because yes, it did, but not her face. Her memory. The thing tilted its head. You signed the form. All 7. I was a kid. No, you were readmitted. The wall behind it opened. No hinges. Just peeled back like wet plaster. A room beyond. Inside. Camp beds. Neatly made. Dozens. No bodies. But each had something folded on the pillow. A hymn. Torn from a hymnal. The same line, everyone. Lay thee down and be unmade. One cot had her name written in red pencil. The same looping. E. No, she whispered. The nurse's voice again, this time from the ceiling. Children always return. They just forget what for. Then the sound of breath on glass. She spun. Nothing. The mirror showed a hallway now. Herself, walking backward into it. But her eyes were blacked out, scratched, the same way her childhood yearbook had been, her photo. Just white ink where the eyes should be. A drawer behind her slammed shut. She ran. Up. The stairs bent, screamed. Peeled. The sun had shifted. The door she came through was smaller now. When she emerged, the infirmary was gone. Just an empty glade. No ruins. No building. Not even ash. Her phone buzzed. Unknown sender. Just a photo. The group lake photo. The one. With the nurse. Only now she was alone in it. The lake behind her black as oil. The children gone. She faced the lens, sweater buttoned wrong. Daisy askew, and her hand rested on no one's shoulder. But her fingers had multiplied. 2. Many. The red pencil rolled out of her pocket. She didn't put it there. No one remembered the storm that night, but the town still wore its afterimage. Trees hunched lower. Streetlights blinked slower. Something in the dirt still pulsed like a heart too far from the body. The boy walked barefoot into town just before dawn, a woman smoking behind the food bank saw him first. He didn't run, didn't cry, just stood in the middle of the road, holding one shoe, the left one, and staring at the thrift store window like it had once known his name. His shirt was wet. Not soaked, just damp the way something stays after being forgotten in a dark room. He didn't shiver. When she asked if he was lost, he only said, "It's listening." Then nothing. Not again, not after that. By 7 a.m., a file was started. No photo yet, just the usual labels. Found minor, male, apparent age 8 to 9, no ID. Later someone would add, no injuries, no signs of abuse, just quiet. Doesn't blink much. They ran his DNA. It matched a missing child from 1994, declared dead. Drowned in Lake Harrow. The lake had long since dried up. They didn't tell the boy. They didn't know how. When they asked him his name, he said it right. His full name, same as the file, but he wouldn't say it again. Not when shown the photo. Not when they brought in his aunt. Not when someone made the mistake of handing him a mirror. The mirror was part of protocol. Assess self-recognition. Trauma response. Dissociation. But when he saw himself, he didn't react like someone confused by age. He reacted like someone seeing something still behind him. He screamed once, then said, "Turn it around. I don't want it to see me." They covered it with a towel and moved it from the room. Later, when no one was looking, the towel was gone. The mirror faced the wall, but its glass showed 2027. The boy refused to sleep under the lights. He would stay awake until they dimmed to amber, then curl against the wall, pressing his ear to the cold tile like he could hear something on the other side. When asked what, he whispered, "It's learning the shape of me." They moved him to the old intake wing. Fewer cameras. Less noise. The first night there, he drew something. Not a child's drawing, no bright colors, no smiling stick figures. Just graphite and space. A hallway, a handprint. A door with no handle. And above it, where a sign should be, he wrote, "Don't remember, me Dr." Halvorsen took over his case after that. She was supposed to do intake psychology and archival cross-reference. But she was the one who found the hymn, tucked inside the boy's shirt pocket, yellowed, brittle, edges burnt. The paper looked older than the boy's supposed age. The song itself didn't exist in any hymnal. But someone had written, faintly on the back, "If he sings it, don't answer." No one ever heard him sing. But once during observation, the night audio picked up humming. Reversed, slowed, it matched the hymn's meter. When played aloud, the hospital fire alarms tripped. No fire was found. But the sprinklers above room 17 wouldn't shut off. That room hadn't existed since 2003. The ledger was missing 4 rooms. When asked, facilities claimed renovations. When pressed, they redacted the blueprint entirely. The boy never asked where he was. He asked only one thing, every day, to anyone who entered. "Is my mom here?" When told her name, he smiled. When told she died in 1994, his smile didn't fall. It froze. No, that didn't happen. She's still waiting, by the water. He began refusing food. Would only drink water from a specific faucet in the east hallway. When they changed the faucet as a precaution, he didn't drink for 36 hours. When asked why, he pointed to the new one and said, "That one reflects me wrong." In his sleep, he would mouth words, not dreams names. Names no one recognized. One tech-curious searched the names online. Found a missing persons archive. 4 of the names matched children who vanished between 1976 and 2004. All declared dead. All last seen near water. On the boy's 3rd week, a drawer opened on its own in observation 3. It hadn't existed before. The staff had passed that wall daily, But that morning, there it was, brass-handled, painted shut until someone forced it open. Inside, a burnt photograph, not charred. Burnt from the edges inward, like something had consumed only what mattered. What remained? A lake, a dock, a shadow of a boy. And faintly, in ash-smudged ink, "Do not let him back," and Dr. Halverson showed him the photo. He traced the dock with his finger and said, "It was deeper then. How long ago?" He paused. Before the mirror broke. That same day, the two-way mirror in the hall shattered. Not from impact, from the center outward in a spiral. No one had touched it. Footage showed only flickering hallway lights and a faint breath fog on the glass. No one was standing there. The boy began humming again, only at sunset. Only facing. The wall. When asked about the lake, he said, "It's not a place, it's a year. And it gets closer every night." They considered sedation. They considered moving him to long-term psychiatric hold. But every file on him corrupted after printing. Digital copies erased themselves. Physical copies arrived smudged, damp, with ink bleeding toward the margins as if avoiding the center. On the final day, a new nurse, not briefed properly, brought in a handheld mirror during intake grooming. When she handed it to him, he stared into it for 28 seconds, then said softly, "I was gone for too long, I remember now." He pressed his thumb to the glass. His fingerprint fogged. The nurses did not. Later that night, in the break room, she opened her locker and found a child's shoe inside. Small, left foot, her name written inside in faded red marker. She had no children. The boy vanished from his room at 3:44 a.m. No door opened. No window broken. Camera showed him standing, then stepping slightly sideways and not being there. A flicker. Then absence. At 3:45 a.m., 2 towns over, a mother woke to the sound of humming in her kitchen. She hadn't had children in the house since 1994. The faucet was running. The air was wet. Her hallway smelled of lake water. And in the living room, someone had left a burnt photograph face down. The following morning, Child Services received a single-page fax. No header, no source. Just a single line, he cried when shown his own reflection. And beneath it, in a hand they swore matched a missing intake officer from 1996. One final note. The mirror remembers before we do. The chapel smelled like someone had tried to scrub time out of it. Bleach fought mildew in the corners, but something older won something. Sunk into the wood. Meredith moved past the last pew, her hand grazing its smooth spine like it remembered being held. Her breath caught when she reached the altar, not from awe, but from the hush. The kind of hush that comes after screaming. Behind the pulpit, where a hymnal shelf should have been, was a wall that didn't match the room, older paint, grayer wood. A crucifix had once hung there, its outline lighter than the rest, as if it had been torn down fast. Her fingers hovered over the paneling, where the grain warped unnaturally, as though the wood had learned how to breathe. She didn't touch it. Not yet. She unfolded the blueprint again. The map ended at the pulpit. No indication of a wall, no. Inked border. Only a smudge where the lines blurred, as if the architect's hand had trembled. And yet she'd seen it, on a sealed page in the court file, left too long in the scanner. Substructure permitted for emergency prayer and containment. Containment. The panel slid back with a sigh she felt in her teeth. Cold air spilled out. Thick and unmoving. Beyond it, a staircase that dropped below the foundation, cut from stone too, even to be natural. The door closed behind her as she stepped through, not with a slam but with intention. She didn't look back. She knew what was worse. The steps took her somewhere time hadn't been kind to. Muffled echoes trailed her descent, like breath through fabric. There were no light switches, only the hum of fluorescents flickering to life, one by one, as if watching her progress. The hall below opened into a chamber carved in silence. It had the proportions of a dormitory, but not the feeling, no warmth. Just ... storage of people. 10 narrow beds lined the walls. Each had a pillow. Each pillow had a stitched name. Third one on the left, Meredith Fay. She didn't move. She stared. The pillow looked unused, crisp, as if ironed yesterday. The thread in her name was identical to her childhood backpack, a mustard yellow she hadn't seen since second grade. She touched the edge of the bed, and something gave. A drawer she hadn't meant to open slid out beneath it. Inside was a shoe. A child's shoe, dirt-scuffed. The laces were looped in a bow she recognized. Her mother used to tie them that way. She stared too long before noticing the second drawer. Then a third. All held single shoes, all different. None labeled. Just placed like offerings. She backed away, trying to understand the shape of her own breath. The chamber felt off, architecturally wrong, as if the floor tilted away from her when she moved. Her reflection caught in a wall mirror across the room, but the angle was wrong. Her face stared back older, with a scar on the temple she didn't have. She looked over her shoulder, no one. She looked again. The scar remained. A soft sound drew her toward the end of the room, a drawer. Not a bed drawer, something deeper. Something in the stone, beneath what looked like a hymn cabinet. The wood was darker here, fire-stained. The drawer protested as she opened it, ash spilling onto her hands. Inside lay a burned photo, half visible. 3 children in chapel uniforms, backs to the camera. One of them clutched a hymnal page, singed and curling, marked with the number 184. Her vision stung. That hymn didn't exist in the books upstairs. She'd checked. She had to. Her mother had made her. "Never sing it, not here," she had whispered once. "It's not for ears, it's for forgetting." She turned the photo over. In faded ink, Recovery Batch 3, subjects 12 to 14, assigned perb alignment. Await further timeline closure. The handwriting was too neat to be human. The lights flickered, then dimmed to a constant low hum. Across the stone wall, a handprint appeared, wet, red, small. Beneath it, the wall pulsed no louder than breath. She stepped back. Her foot hit something soft. Another bed. It hadn't been there before. 11 now. The pillow was blank, the sheet still warm. The drawer beneath it opened before she could stop it. Inside wasn't a shoe, but a spiral-bound journal. Water damaged. Pages torn, rewritten, overwritten again. One sentence looped on the last page in a child's hand. "I wasn't scared until I saw my name where I hadn't been yet." She dropped it. Her hands trembled as if they knew something her head refused. Behind her, the mirror fogged. A breath. But no one stood there. She turned. There was no mirror, only stone. And the faint outline of where it had once been. She ran her fingers along the seams, desperately searching for the reflection again. Not for what it showed, but for when. Her hands met a hairline crack. She followed it upward. It moved beneath her touch, flexed. From behind the wall. A knock. Then a second, muffled, rhythmic. Morse. She pressed her ear to it. Stop pretending you weren't here. The voice wasn't heard, it was known. And it was hers. The wall gave slightly, just enough to make her lurch forward. She fell into darkness. Not falling far, just into another room. A room that mirrored the last. Same beds. Same drawers, but the names were crossed out in red. Each pillow / except one. Meredith Fay. Uncrossed. She wasn't supposed to see. This, she wasn't supposed to still exist. A figure stood at the far end, motionless, not facing her. It held something. She stepped forward slowly, breath slicing the silence. It was a hymnal. Open to page 184. She whispered without meaning. "Tio, that hymn doesn't exist." The figure nodded but didn't turn. "I didn't choose this," she said. The figure whispered back, the voice brittle and wrong. Neither did the others. It turned out it was her, but not her now her, as she'd been at 9. Eyes red from crying, knees scraped. Holding the hymn like it was a warning, not a prayer. The girl looked at the bed, then at the pillow, then vanished. Meredith was alone again. The bed shifted. The hymn lay folded there now. Burnt at the edges, she picked it up. Her hands knew the weight. Her lungs knew the melody. But the words, they weren't words. They were names, layered, overwritten, her own stitched beneath others. Names she didn't know but felt in her ribs, a sound behind her. Paper tearing. The burned photo had changed. Now it showed 4 children. Fourth one looked up. Her face had no mouth, but her eyes screamed, "Why did you leave me?" Meredith dropped the photo. A new sound began, soft, mechanical. From the stone wall. A tape recorder emerged, unlabeled, but playing. Static. Then, her mother's voice. Reading from the hymn. Weeping between lines. "I told them no." She wasn't ready. She didn't remember the beds. Then silence. Then breathing. "She'll see it when the chapel opens again." That's how we wrote it. That's how we unwrite her. The tape snapped. The lights blinked off. Only the mirror glowed, now faint, impossible. Inside it, the chapel was full of beds, of versions of her. Each lying down, eyes open, mouth stitched. Except one. The closest. She mouthed what Meredith couldn't hear, but she knew the words. Because they were the last words she'd written in the journal drawer before it ever existed. "I wasn't scared until I saw my name where I hadn't been yet." The first one came back during a fire drill, not in a blaze of light or screens. Just there, standing at the edge of the field behind the school, wearing the same red backpack she had on when she disappeared 12 years ago. No scorch marks, no blood. Just dirt under her fingernails and eyes that didn't look at anyone. Not directly. Not fully. They called it a miracle, a breakthrough. The papers ran her picture beside an old photo, first-grade smile, missing teeth. But someone at the district must have noticed the difference, even if they didn't say it aloud. In the photo, her right ear was slightly bent forward. The girl who returned? Perfectly symmetrical. A week later, the others came, one by one. At night, each found on a doorstep or sitting calmly outside a fire station, shoes perfectly tied. No bruises. And none of them blinked when asked where they'd been. Meredith had been one of the counselors during the search, younger then. Sharp-voiced and sleepless, spending her nights highlighting topographical maps and her mornings walking tree lines. With a whistle no one answered. She didn't recognize the children now. Not truly. They had the same names, the same medical records, reactivated. But their shoulders curled like they'd been taught to listen to walls. At the reunion, forced by press and legal pressure, the auditorium smelled like paint thinner. And grief, streamers sagged. Someone played a hymn on piano, something from an old choir book, page torn, corner curled. The notes wavered midway through, like the tune itself forgot how it went. One of the returned children, Jessa, flinched so hard her chair tipped. No one caught her. Meredith did what she wasn't supposed to. She walked out with the folder, redacted but not enough. It had been misfiled, alphabetically buried under volunteer evaluations. Inside were time-stamped statements from the year they vanished. Not interviews, transcripts. One page in. Particulars stuck. Where were they taken? Unknown. They weren't. They were exchanged. Back then, it made no sense. Now it read like rot surfacing through wood. She remembered the mirror in the camp's washhouse. It always held condensation longer than the air justified. She remembered wiping it clean and seeing herself with a wristband she wasn't wearing. Camp logo, yes, but not the right year. There were no mirrors at the reunion. Meredith started visiting each of the children's homes, unofficially. She said it was follow-up, integration care. No one stopped her. No one wanted to. Eli the third to return had a drawing taped to his bedroom wall. It looked like a trail map. Too detailed for someone his age. The trees were labeled with numbers, but not coordinates. On his desk sat an old photo of the original campers, sun-faded and cracked at the edge. Someone had tried to burn it. One corner still curled and black, and in the photo's center, a hand. Small, pressed against the inside of the camera lens. No one else seemed to see it. Ellie only said one thing during her visit. Rain had started as she stepped inside. She made no comment. But he did. It was raining when we got replaced. He didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. She noticed a pattern that day. None of the returned children had mirrors in their rooms. Some had blankets nailed over bathroom cabinets. Some had the glass removed altogether. One had a mirror turned toward the wall, but taped to the back was a calendar from 2014, the year after they vanished. The date circled wasn't their disappearance. It was tomorrow. The next week, Meredith drove to the old grounds. Camp Windmere had been shuttered since the investigation. Technically condemned, but the gate hung open. The path down to the mess hall was overgrown, but something had been moving. Through branches still bowed, damp with recent touch. Inside the lodge, the floor creaked differently. Not the usual memory groan of old wood. No, it was rhythmic. Intentional. Like breathing underfoot, she found the ledger behind the fireplace, where bricks had been recently disturbed. Inside, 2 sets of names, one original, one rewritten. The ink bled, as if the paper had rejected the second list. Most names matched, but not all. Hers, for example, had a single letter difference. Mara, D-E-T-H. She didn't remember it ever spelled that way. Behind the ledger, a child's shoe, perfectly clean. Untied. She turned to leave and saw the drawer. It hadn't been there when she walked in. A small one, mismatched wood, no handle. Just a keyhole that breathed frost. She opened it. Inside, a mirror, hairline cracked, reflecting her, but not now. Next year, her hair longer. Her eyes. Emptier. The mirror. Fogg. She hadn't breathed. Behind. Her nothing. She drove back and started collecting the evidence. Not to report. Not anymore. To remember. To anchor. 3 photos. The burnt one from Eli's room. One from the reunion, where 2 of the children had their arms around each other. But their shadows on the floor reached the wrong directions. And one she found tucked in her own yearbook. One she didn't remember posing for. In the background, 5 children. All smiling. All turned slightly toward something, just off frame. Their shoes were clean. She brought the items to a former investigator. Owens, retired, now mostly numb and haunted by unfinished files. She laid them out in his apartment, one by one. He said nothing at first. Then, staring at the mirror, he whispered, "I never signed off on their release." "What do you mean, release?" He didn't blink. "We didn't close the case. Someone did it without record. Someone redacted us." Meredith didn't sleep. That night, her walls felt thinner. The hymn played again, faintly from somewhere below her apartment. She didn't own a piano. She got up to check. No source, no neighbor admitted to music. But on her doorframe, a smudge. Like a small hand pressed there, dragging down. The next morning, Eli was gone. His bed undisturbed. Window locked. Parents claimed he'd never been the same since he came home, that they just moved him to a better place. They couldn't name it. Meredith visited Jessa next. Her room was empty too. All that remained was a torn paper on her desk. A hymn, the same one from the reunion. This time, just one word written below the notes in red pencil. Again. That night, Meredith flipped through her journal, hoping for sense. Instead, she found a page she hadn't written. They followed. Now I follow them. She ran to the mirror. Stared into her own eyes, waited. Fog formed. Not breath. Movement. behind her, but when she turned, only her own burnt photo lay on the floor, the version of her, with different eyes. The next morning, someone else came back. A girl who had never gone missing. Not officially. She smiled for the cameras, but her shadow was backwards. The first step off the paved lot didn't make a sound. Erin stopped. Not because she heard something, but because she didn't. Her boots had touched moss, pine, leaf litter, something wet. But there was no echo, not even the creak of her weight. Just silence, as though the ground had forgotten how to react. She blinked, adjusted the focus ring on the handheld recorder. Static, a low hiss like breath through cotton. Behind her, the old administration hall sat in final dusk, one light still flickering above the locked mailroom slot. The rest had been stripped, windows boarded, plaques unscrewed, campus maps water-stained into illegibility. But the trail behind the greenhouse was still here, only this time. It started with a spiral. 3 trees in, the bark peeled back clean, clinical, and curved into the pattern she'd only seen once before. A year ago, in the corner of the redacted intake forms from case file B67. Subject repeated the shape in ash, on skin, on walls, claimed the birds taught her. That child had vanished the next morning. The file ended mid-sentence. Erin walked slower now. The spiral turned inward as she went, as though the forest wasn't a place but an invitation. Or a test. It was colder past the 5th tree. And too quiet. She passed a broken bench that hadn't aged like the rest of the campus splintered. Yes, but not rotted. The initials carved into the wood still looked sharp. J.E. 1973. Underneath, a child's shoe, waterlogged but impossibly small. She reached for it, hesitated. There were 4 distinct nail holes around it. Squared, like it had been mounted here. The shoe was warm. She didn't take it. Not after what happened with the burnt photo. It was folded between pages 8 and 9 of the journal that arrived last week. No return address. Just blood on the envelope flap and a sticker from the campus archive that no one admitted applying. The photo was fused into itself, heat-warped, but the image behind the blistering emulsion showed a girl smiling toward the woods. The same spiral drawn in soot behind her on the stone wall, and above her shoulder, a window showing a hallway that all maps and floor plans did not exist. The same window appeared again in a glass shard Erin had found near the old chapel ruins. She didn't want to admit it, but she had held both images up to the light. The spiral changed orientation depending on which hand you held them in. Left, it turned inward. Right, it curled out. She kept walking. Every 3rd tree showed another strip of bark, as if marked for observation. The pattern was identical, like something had learned how to carve, but never understood why. It became rhythm, ceremony, control. Erin passed the rusted sign that once said, Nature Study Zone. Now, all that remained was Tura Zo. Beyond it, the air shifted, denser, charged. The trail narrowed into a funnel of brambles and slumped pines. It had been a dry week, but water dripped somewhere, or something mimicking water. The difference felt semantic. She adjusted the lens again. The camera fed back only wind. But the wind had cadence now. A child's voice, not spoken but sung, rode the hiss. A hymn, half forgotten. It came in fragments. If I wake before the night, tell the trail to keep me right. Erin had heard it before. Once. Archive tape R031. Recovered from beneath the foundation of East Dorm C during renovation. Boy who sang it had no name in the system, only initials. SG, age approximately 9, intake date unknown. That recording ended with a knock, 5 slow taps. From inside a wall. Ahead the trail widened again, but not into clearing. Into structure. It looked like forest. Bark, vines, trees. But when she stepped closer, the lines bent wrong. A beam behind ivy, the repetition of nail patterns. And there a drawer, half subsumed by lichen, sticking out from what looked like a collapsed root system. She pulled it open. Inside, a hymn torn from a book, its top edge burned clean. Under it, a mirror hairline cracked, clouded with age. She tilted it. It didn't show her. It showed the trail, but as it would be next year. A new fence, a sign she didn't recognize. And in the corner, her own reflection, but older. Wearing a different coat. Eyes red. She dropped it. The drawer slammed shut on its own. She should have turned back. But the trees behind her weren't in the same order now. She kept moving forward. The path curved again. And there, in the hollow of a tree split by lightning long ago, sat the journal. The journal, the one mailed to them. But she'd left that copy locked in the file cabinet at the campus security office. Numbered, sealed. This one had new pages. Her name was on the spine, scrawled in graphite like a child had tried to remember how to write. She opened it. Today she walked the trail again. Her camera won't catch the names. But they know she looked. She always looked. The mirror already showed her. We don't need to ask twice. Each line bled downward like water had tried to erase it, but failed. The ink wanted to stay. As if the story had been written in more than words. Memory, guilt, prediction. Below, the last line, a burnt fingerprint. She stepped back. That's when she saw the handprint. On the stone just behind the tree, barely visible in shadow, 5 small fingers, pressed in soot. Still warm. The camera shorted. Static bloomed. Then silence, not just in the recorder. The forest itself exhaled. And something watched through the spiral. She heard her own voice then, but not from her mouth. From behind her, if I wait before the night, tell the trail to keep me right. The mirror crack spread. The spiral on the tree next to her deepened. Bark fell away in curls. Underneath skin. Not wood. Flesh. Someone whispered her name. She ran. Branches didn't slow her. The trail blurred. Everything curved back in on itself. The spiral wasn't a symbol, it was an instruction. A way to keep memory in but let truth bleed out. She hit the edge of the path, but the parking lot was gone. Not out of sight. Just missing. A single red light blinked from the campus window above the mailroom. She stood there for what could have been seconds. Could have been a year. Then something dropped behind her. A thud. Not soft, not heavy, but deliberate. She turned. On the ground, the journal. The same one. But the last page was ripped out. Taped to the cover, a burnt photo. It showed her in the same coat she wore now, but running. Behind her, a figure in shadow. No face. Just eyes. Shaped like spirals. She lifted the package with shaking hands and walked back toward the security office. Inside, the mailroom light flickered once, then went black. She slid the package through the slot. No one else was there, but every person she asked later swore the same thing. No one signed for the package, but we all heard it thud. The basement hadn't been listed on any of the ledgers. Not the digitized floor plans Meredith found archived in the municipal planning office, nor the brochure mailed to parents in 1973 when the camp reopened under new guidance. There was no staircase on the maps. No note, just a blank quadrant, boxed in by walls that didn't meet at the corners, but she'd seen it. In a flash between lightning strikes when she stayed too long in the chapel ruin, peering through the warped floorboards. She thought the flicker was her own reflection. But then it moved first. The access door was under the nurse's office, behind a filing cabinet, which had left rust-gouged streaks in the concrete where it had once been dragged aside, not recently, but not long enough ago either. Someone had tried to repaint over the marks, but only in patches. Like Shane that. Wasn't dry yet. She descended slowly, not breathing loud enough to echo. The steps were cement, unpainted. Her flashlight's beam quivered against the air, thick and velvety, not with dust, but with something more ancestral. The kind of silence that institutions don't build, but bury. When her foot touched the bottom, the bulb flickered, not out, but inward. As if light had lost permission, there were rooms. Small, windowless, doorless. Cells that weren't cells, if you used the right words. The leftmost had been lined with soundproofing foam, now half melted and slack, as if slumped in grief. There was a broken mirror on the floor, its edges browned by time, but the glass still whole enough to show a reflection, except it didn't show hers. Not only hers. It showed a girl in a camp uniform, July badge peeling off the shoulder. She stood backwards to the glass, but Meredith saw her face. Young, split-lipped, holding something against her chest. The mirror said the year was 1984. Meredith was born in 1991. She backed away and the mirror stayed lit a moment longer. Then dimmed, then cracked. Another room, deeper in, held rows of metal cabinets with labels erased by water damage, except one. A single drawer wore a tag still legible beneath cracked laminate. Lost items not yet returned. Her hand moved toward it before she could mean to. The handle was warm. The air changed. Inside was a child's shoe. Red canvas, too small for anyone older than 6. The sole was scratched with something, not a name, but a hymn, just the first line, written in nail-scratched block letters. He knows the hour, not the name. Beneath it, a burnt photo, half melted to the lining, a campfire, 5 children. One of them, barely visible, looked like her brother, but aged wrong. He'd gone missing in 2006. This photo was dated 1972. The corner bore a fingerprint, seared in. The drawer clicked shut by itself. She hadn't moved. A sound came then. From somewhere behind the wall. Not footsteps. A scraping breath. Like lungs that had forgotten how to pace time. Meredith turned. The flashlight passed over the corridor, jittering. On the far wall, just above a sink with no pipe, was a message in black marker. It had been half washed away, but the tale of it was still legible. You heard this story too late. She couldn't feel her knees. Only the cold in her back. There had been dreams. Even before she came here. Dreams of woods with no sky, of boys walking backwards, of voices in ash. She dismissed them as her guilt's theater. But here every corner turned was déjà vu. In slow, unbearable bloom. One room was still locked. It wasn't locked with a mechanism, just with dread. But she opened it anyway. Inside was only one object. A tape recorder, mid-century style, sitting on a desk with a chair too small for any adult. It clicked on the moment she entered. No one touched it. A voice played. A boy's, "I waited like you said. I didn't cry this time. I kept the hymn in my head." But the mirror's wrong again. It shows snow. Then another voice, older, muffled behind static. "If you hear this, it means the timeline failed. Do not revisit the chapel. Do not bring objects. Memory is positional, do you understand? They remember through us." The tape stopped. But the recorder kept spinning. As if still listening, Meredith stepped back. Her breath fogged the mirror behind her, though the room was warm. On the glass, a new handprint, smaller than hers. Too small. Fresh. She turned and heard nothing. But her body remembered a rhythm, footsteps, just out of sync with her own. She fled the room. Back in the hall. Every mirror was cracked now. A low electrical hum seeped from the walls, not from machines, but from memory itself. As if the walls weren't built, but recorded. She passed the child's shoe again. This time the hymn line was gone, a blank soul. As if it had never meant to be remembered. And then, a drawer that hadn't been there before. Just protruding from the base of the wall, almost playful. Curious. She opened it. Inside was a single cassette tape, Labeled not with words, but with her initials. She didn't take it. She ran. The stairs groaned as she climbed. The door back into the nurse's office didn't open. It just ceased being closed. She spilled into the room, breathing in short, controlled bursts. But it wasn't the same room anymore. The cabinet was gone. The filing drawers now bore names she didn't recognize, dates from decades before her parents met. A calendar above the desk read August 1975. The walls pulsed faintly. Like lungs. She touched her wrist, checked her watch. It read, "Call missed, Camp 13, 1:17 a.m. She hadn't set a contact with that name. Her phone buzzed once. She didn't answer. She looked at the screen. One new voicemail. She pressed play. The voice was hers, whispering, "Don't follow."